You send a message. You wait, and nothing comes back. No argument, no harsh words, no clear rejection, just silence. And somehow that hurts more than being told no. Think about it. When someone rejects you, it stings, but it's sharp, clean. It has an edge you can hold. Silence doesn't. Silence has no shape, no explanation, no ending. It just sits there, open, empty, and your mind rushes in to fill it. You start replaying the message. Did I say too much, too little? Was the timing wrong? Did I matter at all? The pain grows, not because of what they did, but because of what your mind is doing. Here's the uncomfortable question. If silence itself is neutral, why does it feel so violent inside you? Because it's not the silence, it's the story. It's the story you write in the gap, the meaning you assign to the pause, the conclusions you reach without evidence. It's not that they didn't reply. It's that your mind whispered, "They don't care. You're replaceable. You were foolish to hope." That's the real wound. Rejection closes a door. Silence leaves it half open, and the mind hates unfinished endings, so it invents one, usually the cruelest version possible. Notice the pattern. Stimulus, a message unread, a reply delayed, then the thought, then the emotion, then the reaction, and suddenly you're trapped in a loop, refreshing, rechecking, rewriting the story again and again. You're not reacting to reality anymore. You're reacting to your interpretation of it. The Stoics saw this long before unread receipts existed. Marcus Aurelius wrote that people are disturbed not by events, but by the views they take of them. Not the silence, the meaning. Not their action, your story. And here's the part most people miss. Silence feels worse than rejection because it gives up control. It hands the pen to your most anxious narrator. Your mind doesn't choose calm by default. It chooses familiarity. And for many of us, familiarity sounds like self-doubt. So the loop tightens. You wait for a response to feel okay, but the longer you wait, the less okay you feel, until your sense of worth is hanging on someone else's timing. That's the trap. And once you see it, something shifts. Because if the pain isn't coming from the silence, then it can't be controlled by breaking the silence either. No reply won't heal it. No explanation will fully close it. Only one thing can: interrupting the story. If this reaction feels automatic, if it feels familiar, if it feels like something you've lived through before, then maybe this message isn't about this message at all. Maybe it's a mechanism, a loop. And if it's a loop, it can be understood. And if it can be understood, it can be broken. So the real question becomes this: what exactly happens inside you between the silence and the suffering? Let's slow that moment down.
Let's slow that moment down. Right after the silence, before the spiral. Because what feels like chaos is actually a very predictable sequence. First, there's the stimulus. Nothing dramatic, just no reply, no sound, no signal, just absence. Then comes the thought, and this is where everything changes. Not all at once, not loudly, quietly. They saw it. I'm being ignored. I'm not important enough to answer. Notice something. The silence didn't say any of that. You did. The event was neutral. The story was not. Thought turns into emotion, a tightening in the chest, a low hum of anxiety, that uneasy feeling you can't quite name. Then comes the reaction. You check your phone again. You reread the message. You scroll up for clues. You tell yourself you're just checking, but what you're really doing is feeding the story. And then the loop closes. Stimulus, thought, emotion, reaction, again and again and again. That's the loop. And here's the relief most people never hear. You're not weak for feeling this way. You're not needy. You're not broken. You're just inside a mechanism, a human one. The mind is a meaning-making machine. Give it a gap, and it fills it. Give it silence, and it writes a story, usually one where you're at fault. It's not the message that hurts. It's the meaning you attach to it. It's not the delay. It's the conclusion. It's not that you lack calm. It's that you've handed control to the story. This is why reassurance doesn't last. Even when they finally reply, even when they explain, you feel relief, briefly. And then the next silence starts the loop again. Because the issue was never them, it was never the phone, it was the pattern. Marcus Aurelius warned about this exact trap, that the mind adds suffering on top of events, then forgets it was the one who added it. Not reality, interpretation. Once you see this, the fog begins to lift, because if silence were truly the cause, everyone would react the same way. But they don't. Some people shrug and move on, others unravel. Same stimulus, different story. That's your proof. The pain is not outside you, but neither is it permanent. And this is important. This video isn't about getting people to reply faster. It's not about tricks or tactics or playing games. That would just hand your peace over to someone else again. This is about taking your calm back, about breaking the loop before it tightens. Because once you see the structure, you stop blaming yourself. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking the right question, "Where do I step in?" Every loop has a weak point, a moment before it locks, not at the reaction, not after the emotion explodes, earlier, at the thought, at the story. That's where control lives, not in forcing an outcome, but in choosing an interpretation. And this is where Stoicism becomes practical, not philosophical, not abstract, but usable. Because the Stoics weren't trying to erase emotion, they were trying to stop unnecessary suffering. They knew you can't control silence, but you can control the meaning you give it. And once you reclaim that, the loop loosens, the body softens, the urge to check fades. You don't feel numb, you feel steady, not because you got an answer, but because you no longer need one to be okay. So now the path forward becomes clear. If this loop has a structure, then it also has points of interruption, and that's what comes next, where to step in, how to cut it early, and how to build an identity that doesn't collapse in quiet moments. Because silence will always exist. The question is, will it still control you?
So let's start here, with something uncomfortable, but freeing. Silence is real. It exists. It happens. And fighting that fact is where the suffering begins. Not the silence itself, the resistance to it. The moment your mind says, "This shouldn't be happening," you've already stepped into pain. Because reality doesn't negotiate. Silence doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't explain itself. It just is. And every time you argue with that, every time you demand meaning from something that offers none, you tighten the loop.
It's not that they didn't reply, it's that you're insisting they should have. That single word, should, is where calm disappears. Stoicism starts here, not with control, but with acceptance. Not approval, not surrender, just seeing clearly. Silence is a fact, not a verdict. No message has moral weight. No delay is a personal attack. But the mind turns it into one. Why? Because the mind wants certainty, and when it can't find it, it invents it, usually at your expense. Now look at what happens next. You take something that isn't yours and you try to own it. Their response time, their attention, their priorities, none of that belongs to you. Yet the moment you tie your value to it, you hand over control. You say, without realizing it, my calm depends on you. And that's a dangerous trade, because now your identity is waiting to be confirmed, waiting to be chosen, waiting to be validated. That's not connection, that's captivity. It's not that you care too much, it's that you're measuring yourself with someone else's ruler. The Stoics warned against this quietly but relentlessly. They said suffering begins when we attach our worth to things outside our control, and nothing is more outside your control than another person's silence. Think about the exchange you're making. You give them power over your peace in return for a reply that may or may not come. And even if it does come, it never stays. The relief fades, the next silence resets the loop, because the problem was never solved, it was postponed. This is where the story matters, because right now you're mixing two things that were never meant to be mixed, facts and interpretations. The fact is simple. There is no reply. That's it. No tone, no intention, no message hidden inside. Everything else is story. I'm not important. They don't care. I said the wrong thing. Those aren't facts. They're drafts. And the mind keeps revising them, making them darker, more convincing, more painful. Why? Because an unfinished story feels unbearable, so the mind finishes it for you. Badly. But here's the shift. The moment you separate fact from story, the weight starts to lift. Not all at once, but noticeably. You stop arguing with reality. You stop chasing control where none exists, and something unexpected happens. Calm returns, not because the situation changed, but because your relationship to it did. You're no longer reacting to silence as if it were a judgment. You see it for what it is, an empty space. And empty space doesn't harm you unless you fill it with something sharp. This is what people miss. Detachment isn't coldness, it's clarity. It's saying, this belongs to them, and this belongs to me. Their response is theirs, my worth is mine. Their timing is theirs, my identity is mine. Once you draw that line, the loop weakens, because the loop feeds on confusion, on blurred boundaries, on the illusion that someone else's behavior defines you. When that illusion breaks, the pain loses its fuel. You're not suppressing emotion, you're removing the false cause, and that's the difference. Stoicism doesn't teach you to feel less, it teaches you to feel accurately, to stop bleeding from wounds that aren't real. And now comes the most important realization of this entire section. Recognizing the story is only the beginning. Seeing the illusion doesn't automatically dissolve it. The mind is persistent. It will try again, tomorrow, next week, with someone else. So awareness is step one, but awareness alone doesn't stop the loop. It just shows you where it starts. And once you know that, you can step in early, before the emotion takes over, before the body tightens, before the story becomes truth. That's the next layer. Not just seeing the story, but cutting the loop before it finishes writing you into it. That's where real control begins, and that's what we're about to build.
But here's where understanding has to turn into action. Because knowing the story is false doesn't mean your body believes it yet. The loop doesn't live in logic alone. It lives in the chest, in the stomach, in the nervous system. You already know this moment. The phone is quiet. Your heart feels heavier than it should. There's a tightness just below your ribs. Your thoughts start racing ahead of reality. Not loudly, relentlessly. Your mind isn't asking questions anymore. It's predicting outcomes, and almost all of them are bad. This is the exact moment the loop begins. Not when hours pass, not when days go by. Right here. Most people miss it. They only notice once they're already drowning in the story. But this is where control actually exists. Not after the spiral, before it completes. Because the loop has a sequence, and anything with a sequence can be interrupted. The mistake people make is trying to cut the loop at the end. They try to argue with the story. They try to reason themselves out of anxiety. That never works. You can't outthink a nervous system that feels threatened. So you cut the loop earlier, before thought becomes belief, before emotion becomes identity. Here's how. First, pause. Not dramatically, not forcefully, just a moment where you don't act. You don't refresh, you don't reread, you don't send another message to regain control. You stop adding fuel. This pause isn't passive, it's deliberate. It's you stepping out of automatic behavior. Then, breathe. Not to calm down instantly, not to erase discomfort, just to signal safety. Slow breath in, longer breath out. Because calm doesn't come from answers, it comes from regulation. Then, name. Not the story, the sensation. Not, I'm being ignored, that's a narrative. Name what's actually there. Tightness, heat, restlessness, pressure. That's it. The moment you name sensation without explanation, the story weakens. Because the story feeds on vagueness, on confusion, on unexamined feeling. It's not, this means something about me. It's, this is anxiety in my chest. That shift matters. You're no longer inside the story. You're observing the loop. And observation creates space. Now comes the hardest part. Staying. Not fixing, not controlling, not seeking reassurance from the outside. Staying with uncertainty. This is where most people break, because uncertainty feels unbearable until you stop running from it. Here's the truth no one tells you. Discomfort doesn't grow forever. It peaks, and then it fades, but only if you don't interfere. Every time you chase relief by checking, messaging, imagining outcomes, you reset the loop. You teach your nervous system that uncertainty is dangerous, so the next time silence appears, the reaction is stronger. This is why Stoics treated discomfort as training, not punishment, not something to escape, training. Like holding a plank. At first, your muscles shake, your mind screams to stop. But if you stay, even just a little longer than before, strength builds. Silence works the same way. Each moment you don't collapse into the story, you expand your capacity. You prove something quietly but powerfully. I can feel this and still be okay. That's identity forming, not from affirmation, not from replies, from experience. It's not about becoming indifferent, it's about becoming resilient. There's a critical difference. Indifference shuts you down. Resilience holds you steady. One avoids feeling, the other can contain it. So when silence stretches on, you don't rush to control it.
You don't send messages to calm yourself. You don't chase clarity from someone else's behavior. You let the sensation rise and fall, because now you understand something fundamental. It's not silence testing you, it's your tolerance for uncertainty being trained. And every time you stay present, the loop loses momentum. Calm becomes familiar, not because the world changed, but because you did. This is the shift. You stop asking, how do I make them respond? And start asking, how do I stay centered regardless? That question changes everything. But there's a limit to techniques. You can pause, you can breathe, you can name sensations, and it works, but only temporarily if the deeper structure stays the same. Because if your identity still depends on response, the loop will always find a way back. To remove silence's power permanently, you need something stronger than regulation. You need a foundation, a sense of self that doesn't rise and fall with unread messages. That's the next layer. Not managing emotions moment by moment, but becoming someone silence can't shake. And that's where we go next.
And then, after you've seen the loop, after you've learned how to cut it early, the next question is no longer what to do when they go silent. It becomes, who am I without that response? Because handling a moment is one thing. Building a person who isn't shaken by that moment is something else entirely. Silence only has power when it reaches your identity, when your worth is still hanging out there waiting to be confirmed by someone else. It's not about the message, it's about who you become while waiting for it. Look at this honestly. If one unread message is enough to throw you off balance, the issue isn't them. It's where you placed your sense of self. Many people say, I'm just sad, but it's not really sadness. It's not sadness. It's dependency. Depending on external signals to decide if you're okay, chosen or discarded, important or invisible. And to break free from that, you don't need more tactics. You need a new identity. A simple sentence, but one you must repeat until it settles in your bones. I am someone who is not shaken by silence. Not to sound strong, but to redraw the boundary inside your mind. Because when identity is clear, emotion naturally calms. The Stoics didn't try to control the world. They controlled where they stood within it. Epictetus said that the moment you hand your peace to someone else, you willingly become their slave. Not because they are cruel, but because you placed power in the wrong place. And this leads to the next step: design the inner day. It sounds simple, yet almost no one does it. The mind hates emptiness. If you don't fill it deliberately, it will write the story for you. And it usually chooses the darkest version. Prolonged silence doesn't hurt because of what it is. It hurts because your inner day has no structure. You wake up with no rhythm. The afternoon drifts with no anchor. Night falls and the mind begins to wander, and it returns to the same familiar place, the loop. So design it, not perfectly, just enough to keep the mind from roaming unchecked. A morning with meaning that doesn't depend on anyone. An afternoon with purpose that doesn't need a reply. An evening calm enough that you don't need to keep checking your phone. It's not about productivity, it's about control. Not controlling others, but refusing to let your mind be dragged around unconsciously. When the inner day has rhythm, outer silence naturally loses its weight. And here we arrive at a concept many people misunderstand: emotional neutrality. Not numbness, not indifference, not pretending you don't care. It's not numbness, it's balance. You still feel, but you don't hand the steering wheel to emotion.
Emotion arrives. You notice it. It stays, and then it passes. No chasing, no clinging, like clouds moving across a mountain peak. The mountain doesn't react, not because it's cold, but because it's grounded. Silence is the wind. Emotion is the cloud. Your identity is the mountain. No matter how strong the wind blows, the mountain remains. That is the inner fortress, built not with high walls, but with clarity. Clarity about who you are. Clarity about what you control. Clarity about what you no longer need to feel whole. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you can retreat into yourself at any moment. No one can reach that place unless you allow them to. And when you no longer react unconsciously, when the loop no longer starts automatically, when the story no longer writes itself for you, silence loses its power. It still exists, but it no longer controls you. And that is when the game truly changes.
And now we close the circle. Silence doesn't disappear. It never promised to. Messages may still come late, replies may still not come at all. But here's what has changed. It no longer controls you. Not your mood, not your focus, not your identity. You've seen the story for what it is. You've learned how the loop begins. You've practiced stepping out of it before it tightens. It's not about forcing calm. It's about returning to center. First, you noticed the story your mind tells. Then, you learn to cut the loop before it runs you. And finally, you rebuilt an identity that doesn't rise or fall with external noise. That's the real journey, from reaction to awareness to control. And control doesn't mean dominance, it means choice. You still feel the pull, you still notice the pause, but now there's space between the moment and your reaction. That space is freedom. So here's a simple experiment, just 24 hours. The next time silence shows up, don't chase it, don't explain it, don't decorate it with meaning. Notice the sensation, name it, and stop there. No extra story, no imaginary conclusions. Watch how quickly the loop weakens when you refuse to feed it, because the mind only spins when you give it fuel. And this isn't about becoming cold. It's not about pretending you don't care. It's not indifference. It's balance. You care without collapsing. You feel without losing control. That's calm. Not the calm of avoidance, but the calm of someone who knows where they stand. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that no one can disturb your inner world unless you open the door. Today, you close it gently, not in anger, not in fear, just with clarity. If this resonated with you, if you recognized your own loop somewhere in these words, share your experience below. Not to vent, not to seek reassurance, but to mark awareness. And if you want to continue this journey, if you want more reminders to stay centered in a world that constantly pulls outward, subscribe, not as a habit, but as a quiet commitment to your own calm, your own control, your own identity. Silence will still come and go, but you will remain. Steady, grounded, unmoved. And that's when silence finally loses its power.